The Denobulan royal palace shuddered as another volley of missiles struck the planet's surface, and Counselor Gruss knew they were out of time. He burst into the emergency session of the Galactic Council, his robe singed and his face grim. The other counselors fell silent as he took his seat. "The Kryn Empire has broken through our defenses," Gruss said. "Their fleets are annihilating our worlds one by one. We have fought with everything we have, but it's not enough. We need a new strategy, something they won't expect." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The war had raged for decades, claiming billions of lives across the galaxy. The once mighty council was now a shadow of its former self, its armies depleted and its worlds in ruins. "There is one option we haven't considered," Gruss continued. "A species we put into cryosleep centuries ago before we achieved interstellar travel. A species known for its tenacity, its resourcefulness, and its sheer unpredictability." The counselors exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew the species Gruss was referring to. "Humans?" "You can't be serious," Counselor Zorn scoffed. "Humans are primitive, violent, and emotionally unstable. They nearly destroyed their own planet before we put them on ice." "And yet they accomplished feats we thought impossible," Gruss countered. "They achieved spaceflight in crude vessels fueled by explosive chemicals. They created AIs that rivaled their own intellect. They even managed to send a handful of their kind to a neighboring world, all with technology that would be laughable to a Denobulan child. Imagine what they could do with our resources and knowledge." The debate raged for hours, but in the end, the council was out of options. A team was dispatched to the remote cryo facility, and the thawing process began. Carl Powell awoke to a galaxy he no longer recognized, his old life now ancient history. But as he and his fellow humans were brought before the council, one thing became clear. The fate of the galaxy now rested in their hands, whether the council liked it or not. As the human team was escorted through the halls of the Denobulan royal palace, Carl couldn't help but marvel at the advanced technology that surrounded them. Holographic displays flickered with real-time battle data, while sleek, angular architecture spoke of a species that had long since mastered the art of interstellar travel. The briefing room was no less impressive, with a massive central table that displayed a detailed star map of the galaxy. Counselor Gruss stood at the head of the table, his expression grave as he introduced the humans to King Zarthok. The Denobulan ruler regarded the humans with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, his eyes narrowing as he studied their primitive attire and unaugmented bodies. "These are the saviors you spoke of, Counselor?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "They look like they can barely stand on two legs, let alone fight a war." Carl bristled at the insult but held his tongue, knowing that they needed the Denobulan's support. Instead, he focused on the star map, his mind already racing with possibilities. As the briefing progressed, it became clear that the Council's strategies were failing. The Kryn Empire was adapting to their tactics, and each new battle brought more losses and fewer gains. Carl exchanged glances with his fellow humans, seeing the same realization in their eyes. It was then that he met Zalara, the king's daughter and a brilliant scientist in her own right. She seemed dismissive of the humans at first, but as Carl began to outline his ideas, he saw a spark of intrigue in her eyes. "You propose infiltrating the enemy's supply lines?" she asked, leaning forward. "That's actually not a bad idea." Carl nodded, pointing to a key stronghold on the star map. "If we can sabotage their resources, we can weaken their ability to fight. It won't win the war on its own, but it could buy us some much-needed time." The plan was met with resistance from King Zarthok and some of the other council members, but Gruss and Zalara saw its potential. They agreed to support the mission, much to the chagrin of General Krelok, who made no secret of his disdain for the humans. Over the next few days, Carl and his team underwent intensive training with the Denobulan's advanced technology. They marveled at the sophisticated weapons and stealth equipment, knowing that such tools could give them a critical edge in the coming mission. But even as they prepared, trouble was brewing. Intelligence reports indicated that the Kryn had discovered their plan and were preparing a preemptive strike against the royal palace itself. Carl knew they had to act fast. With Zalara's help, he devised a two-pronged strategy. One team would proceed with the original mission to sabotage the enemy's supply lines, while another would remain behind to defend against the impending attack. As the teams geared up and prepared to deploy, Carl felt a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. He knew that the fate of the Denobulan Empire, and perhaps the entire galaxy, now rested on their shoulders. He exchanged a final nod with Zalara, seeing the same persistence in her eyes. They were ready. It was time to show the galaxy what humans were really made of. The palace shook violently as the first wave of Kryn missiles struck. Carl's mind raced, formulating a plan even as alarms blared and debris rained from the ornate ceiling. "We need to split up," he shouted over the chaos, addressing the assembled humans and Denobulans. "One team defends the palace, the other proceeds with the original mission." Zalara nodded, her eyes gleaming with newfound respect. "I'll coordinate with our military. What's your strategy?" Carl's gaze swept the room, taking in the advanced technology at their disposal. "We'll use guerrilla tactics, set up decoys, create a maze of traps, make them work for every inch." As Carl's team scrambled to fortify the palace, Sergeant John Hawkins led the sabotage squad towards the enemy stronghold. The stealth technology provided by the Denobulans bent light around them, rendering them nearly invisible. Hawkins held up a fist, signaling his team to halt. Before them loomed a massive hangar filled with more weaponry than they had ever imagined. "Plant the charges," he whispered. "We'll cripple their war machine." As they worked, a muffled sound caught Hawkins's attention. He crept towards its source, finding a group of emaciated prisoners huddled in a dark corner. Among them was a Denobulan officer, his uniform tattered but his eyes sharp. "I'm Zornak," the officer whispered. "You must warn the Council. The Kryn have developed a weapon that could annihilate entire star systems." Hawkins' mind raced. Their mission parameters hadn't accounted for prisoners or game-changing intel. He made a split-second decision. "We're getting you out of here, all of you." Back at the palace, Carl crouched behind a makeshift barricade, his heart pounding. The Kryn forces had breached the outer defenses, but were now struggling through the labyrinth of traps and false targets he had engineered. A Kryn soldier rounded the corner, and Carl squeezed the trigger of his Denobulan energy rifle. The alien fell, its armor smoking. More took its place, and the air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and burning metal. Zalara appeared at his side, her face streaked with grime. "Your tactics are unorthodox," she admitted, blasting another Kryn trooper, "but effective." A thunderous roar echoed through the palace as King Zarthok himself joined the fray, leading his elite guard into battle. Carl watched in awe as the Denobulan monarch cut through the enemy ranks like a force of nature. The tide of battle shifted. Kryn soldiers began to fall back, overwhelmed by the combined might of human ingenuity and Denobulan technology. As the last enemy craft fled the planet's atmosphere, a cheer went up from the defenders. Carl allowed himself a moment of relief before the reality of their situation set in. They had won this battle, but the war was far from finished, and if Hawkins' team had succeeded, they might have just made a powerful enemy even more desperate. As if summoned by his thoughts, a battered shuttle touched down in the palace courtyard. Hawkins emerged, supporting the weakened form of Zornak. "Sir," Hawkins reported, his face grim, "we completed the mission, but we've got a bigger problem. The Kryn have a new weapon, something that could change everything." Carl exchanged a look with Zalara and King Zarthok. The real fight, it seemed, was just beginning. The debriefing room buzzed with tension as Carl, Zalara, and King Zarthok huddled around Zornak. The rescued Denobulan officer's voice quavered as he revealed the nature of the Kryn's secret weapon. "It's an AI," Zornak said, his eyes haunted. "One capable of seizing control of our ships, turning them against us." Carl's mind raced, processing the implications. "Do we know where it's located?" Zornak nodded weakly. "A fortified space station deep in Kryn territory. I overheard coordinates during my captivity." As the Galactic Council convened to strategize, Carl found himself at the center of a heated debate. The plan that emerged was audacious. A two-pronged assault, with Carl leading an infiltration team to disable the AI while a diversionary force drew away the bulk of the Kryn defenses. General Kraylock, his face twisted in a sneer, protested, "You would entrust our fate to these Primitives? King Zarthok silenced him with a raised hand. Counselor Gruss was right about the humans. They've proven their worth. The mission is set. Hours later, Carl stood in the hangar bay, checking the seals on his stealth suit. Zalara approached, her own gear gleaming in the harsh light. "Ready for this?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Carl nodded, allowing himself a grim smile. "Born ready." Their ship slipped out of the denobulan atmosphere, cloaking systems engaged. As they navigated the treacherous path to the Kryn space station, reports crackled over the comms. General Kralok's diversionary force had engaged the enemy. Asteroid fields loomed before them, a maze of spinning rock and deadly debris. Carl gripped the controls, his enhanced reflexes put to the test as he wove through the chaos. A stray fragment glanced off their hull, the impact reverberating through the ship. "Steady," Zalara murmured, her eyes fixed on the sensor readouts. They emerged from the field to find the Kryn space station looming ahead, a monstrous construct of metal and malice. Docking clamps engaged with a soft thud, and Carl led his team into the belly of the beast. The station's corridors were a labyrinth of shadows and hidden dangers. They encountered the first pocket of resistance in a vast chamber filled with humming servers. Blaster fire erupted, filling the air with the scent of ozone and burning metal. "This isn't Kryn tech," one of the denobulan warriors hissed, gesturing to a fallen enemy. Carl's blood ran cold as he recognized the implications. Rogue factions. They're after the AI too. They fought their way deeper into the station, each chamber bringing new horrors. In a moment of chaos, Zalara shoved Carl aside, taking a blast meant for him. She crumpled, her suit stained with spreading crimson. "Go," she gasped, pressing a data crystal into his hand. "Finish it." Leaving two warriors to guard her, Carl pressed on. They reached the AI core, a pulsing mass of circuitry and malevolent intelligence. As Carl worked to shut it down, alarms blared. On the monitors, he watched in horror as Galactic Council ships turned their weapons on their allies. His fingers flew over the console, racing against time. With a final decisive command, the AI core went dark. The hijacked ships stuttered in their attack, systems rebooting. Carl sagged against the terminal, exhaustion and relief washing over him. But the victory was short-lived. He returned to find Zalara barely clinging to life, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "We did it," he said, cradling her head. Zalara's eyes focused on his face, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "You did it. Maybe we were wrong about humans after all." Her hand clutched at his arm, strength fading. "Carl, there's something else, an ancient power. It could change everything." Before he could ask more, her eyes slid shut. Carl bowed his head, grief and persistence warring within him. As the station shuddered around them, he knew this was only the beginning. Carl's world shattered as Zalara's hand slipped from his arm, her final words echoing in his mind. He bowed his head, allowing himself a brief moment of grief before the station's tremors jolted him back to reality. "We need to move," Zornak urged, his voice thick with emotion. As they made their way back to the ship, Carl clutched the data crystal Zalara had pressed into his hand. Its weight seemed to grow with each step, a physical reminder of her sacrifice and the mystery she had left behind. The journey back to Denobula was somber. Carl replayed Zalara's last words over and over, trying to decipher their meaning. An ancient power. It could change everything. What had she discovered? Upon their return, the Galactic Council convened to discuss the mission's outcome. The mood was mixed, relief at the AI's destruction, tempered by the loss of Zalara, and the lingering question of what she had meant to reveal. As the Council debated their next move, Carl approached Zornak. "We need to investigate Zalara's final message," he said in a low voice. Zornak nodded, his eyes narrowing. "I've been analyzing the data crystal. It contains coordinates to an uncharted sector of space." King Zarthok overheard their conversation and joined them. "What are you proposing?" Carl straightened, meeting the king's gaze. "A covert expedition to these coordinates. If Zalara believed this could change everything, we owe it to her to find out what's there." After hours of debate, the council agreed to dispatch a small team led by Karl and Zornak. As they prepared for departure, General Kraylock approached, his face a mask of hardly restrained contempt. "Don't think this changes anything, human," he growled. "One lucky mission doesn't prove your worth." Karl ignored the barb, focusing instead on the task ahead. Their ship, equipped with the latest Denobulan stealth technology, slipped away from the planet under the cover of darkness. The journey to the coordinates was treacherous. They navigated through fields of spatial anomalies, each one threatening to tear their ship apart. Karl's enhanced reflexes were pushed to their limits as he piloted through the chaos. "Energy spike ahead," Zornak called out, his eyes fixed on the sensor readouts. As they emerged from a particularly dense cluster of anomalies, a massive shape loomed before them. It was a derelict ship, its design unlike anything they had ever seen. "My God," Karl breathed, taking in the alien vessel's sleek, organic lines. They docked with the derelict, the magnetic clamps engaging with a dull thud. Karl led the boarding party, his heart pounding as they stepped into the unknown. The ship's corridors were a maze of shadows and decay. As they moved deeper into the vessel, they encountered a grisly sight: the desiccated remains of the ship's crew, scattered throughout the halls. "What happened here?" one of the team members whispered, her voice trembling. Karl knelt beside one of the bodies, examining it closely. No sign of weapon damage. It's as if they were drained of life. They pressed on, the tension mounting with each step. In what appeared to be the ship's command center, they found a still-functioning data terminal. Zornak set to work decrypting its contents. "It's a gold mine," he exclaimed, his fingers flying over the alien interface. "This ship belonged to a civilization called the Zarkoth. They were at war with something terrifying." Karl leaned in, scanning the translated text. His blood ran cold as he read about the superweapon the Zarkoth had developed, a device capable of harnessing the fundamental forces of the universe itself. "They won their war," Zornak continued, his voice hushed. "But the weapon, it triggered a cataclysm. The Zarkoth paid the ultimate price for their victory." Karl's mind raced, connecting the dots. This is what Zalara discovered, the ancient power she spoke of. As they delved deeper into the ship's database, they uncovered coordinates for the superweapon's control system. It was still intact, hidden away on a nearby planetoid. Karl turned to his team, his expression grim. "We have a choice to make. This weapon could turn the tide of our war. But the risks—" Zornak met his gaze, understanding passing between them. "The enemy won't hesitate to use any advantage they can get. We can't afford to let this fall into their hands." With renewed purpose, they set course for the planetoid. As they approached, Karl couldn't shake the feeling that they were crossing a line, one from which there might be no return. Karl's hand hovered over the activation sequence. Sweat beaded on his brow as he looked to Zornak, seeking confirmation. The Denobulan scientist nodded grimly. "Do it," Zornak said, his voice barely above a whisper. With a deep breath, Karl initiated the Zarkoth superweapon. The planetoid beneath them shuddered, energy arcing across its surface in blinding patterns. A wave of raw power burst outward, engulfing their ship and rippling across space. Alarms blared as their systems flickered. Through the view screen, Karl watched in horror as entire sectors of space warped and twisted. Enemy ships caught in the blast simply ceased to exist. "My God," Karl breathed, "what have we done?" In the days that followed, the magnitude of their actions became clear. The Galactic Council chambers echoed with heated arguments. General Kraylock's face contorted with rage as he pointed an accusing finger at Karl. "This human has brought devastation upon us all," Kraylock thundered. "He must be removed from command immediately." King Zarthok raised a hand, silencing the uproar. "While the consequences are severe, we cannot deny the strategic advantage gained. The enemy fleet has been crippled." As if on cue, a young Denobulan officer burst into the chamber. "Your Majesty, long-range scanners have detected something unexpected." The main display flickered to life, revealing a vast debris field. Amidst the wreckage, clusters of energy signatures pulsed weakly. Survivors, Carl murmured, leaning forward. From the enemy fleet. A crackling transmission filled the room, desperation clear in the alien voice. Please, we surrender. Grant us mercy. Carl's mind raced, an audacious plan forming. He turned to the council, his voice steady. This is our chance. We can end this war not just through destruction, but through integration. Kralok scoffed. You would have us welcome our sworn enemies? I would have us seize an opportunity, Carl countered. Think of the intelligence we could gain, the technology we could acquire. We can turn their strength into our own. Hours of debate followed, but in the end Carl's plan was approved. He found himself at the helm of a rescue operation unlike any in galactic history. Human ships led the charge, weaving through debris fields still crackling with residual energy from the superweapon. Carl watched from the bridge as his crews executed daring maneuvers, latching onto crippled enemy vessels and extracting survivors. Inside a denobulan processing center, Carl observed as former prisoners facilitated communication with the rescued aliens. One of them, a towering insectoid, chittered rapidly to a human translator. They're providing defensive schematics for their core worlds, the translator reported, excitement clear in her voice. This could be the key to breaching their final defenses. But integration proved far from smooth. On a denobulan colony world, Carl sprinted down a crowded street, alarms blaring overhead. A group of dissidents, their faces twisted with hate, had seized control of a munitions depot. This is madness, Carl shouted, taking cover as weapons fire peppered the ground around him. We're on the same side now. A hulking alien, one of the defectors, crouched beside him. Not all see it that way, human, but we will stand with you. Together they formulated a plan. Carl led a diversionary assault while the defector and his companions outflanked the attackers. In the aftermath, as denobulan security forces secured the area, Carl uncovered a disturbing link to General Kralok's inner circle. Standing before the Galactic Council once more, Carl presented his findings. This goes beyond mere distrust, he declared. There are those actively working to sabotage our efforts. King Zarthok's expression hardened. General Kralok, you will answer for this. As Kralok was led away, sputtering denials, Carl turned his attention to a holographic display of enemy territory. Defector intelligence had revealed vulnerabilities in their bastion worlds, fortresses that had seemed impregnable mere weeks ago. We have an unprecedented opportunity, Carl addressed the council. With our combined knowledge and strength, we can strike at the very heart of their war machine. He outlined a daring plan of infiltration and sabotage, leveraging the unique skills of both denobulans and defectors. As he spoke, Carl could see the spark of hope igniting in the eyes of those around him. It won't be easy, he concluded, but together we can end this war once and for all. With a united sense of purpose, preparations for the assault began. Carl knew the coming days would test them all, but for the first time in years, victory seemed within reach. Carl's eyes swept over the holographic display, tracing the intricate web of defenses surrounding the enemy's core fortresses. 3 impregnable strongholds glowed red, pulsing like malignant hearts at the center of the enemy's war machine. These are our targets, he said, voice low but firm. Take them out, and we cripple their entire command structure. Zornak leaned in, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. The defenses are formidable. How do you propose we breach them? Carl's lips curved in a grim smile. We don't. We go around them. He outlined his plan, drawing on every scrap of intelligence gleaned from the defectors. 3 strike teams would infiltrate the fortresses from within, using captured supply ships to bypass external defenses. As the briefing concluded, Carl caught the eye of a towering insectoid defector. Krasik, I want you on my team for the primary target. The alien's compound eyes glittered. It will be my honor, Carl Human. Hours later, Carl crouched in the cramped cargo hold of a lumbering supply freighter, surrounded by a mix of human, denobulan, and defector operatives. The ship shuddered as it docked with the massive battle station defending the enemy's high command. Remember, Carl whispered, we move fast and silent. Take out the control nodes, then we open the door for the main assault. They slipped from the freighter like ghosts, fanning out through the station's corridors. Carl led a small team toward the primary security hub, their footsteps muffled by the constant hum of machinery. A startled guard barely had time to reach for his weapon before Kraszik's powerful limbs crushed his exoskeleton. Carl nodded grimly, stepping over the body to access the security terminal. His fingers flew over the alien interface, muscle memory from countless hours of training taking over. Warning klaxons cut off mid-wail as he systematically disabled the station's internal defenses. "We're in," he subvocalized into his comm unit. "All teams, execute primary objectives." The station erupted into chaos as Carl's main assault force poured in through newly opened airlocks. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as defenders rallied to repel the attackers. Carl ducked and weaved through the melee, leading his strike team deeper into the station's bowels. They fought their way through cramped maintenance tunnels and vast engine rooms, each meter gained paid for in blood and sweat. A stray shot grazed Carl's armor, leaving a scorched furrow. He gritted his teeth against the pain, returning fire with practiced precision. An enemy soldier crumpled, chest smoking. "Carl, human!" Kraszik's voice cut through the din of battle. "The command center! It's just ahead!" They burst into a cavernous chamber, dominated by holographic displays. At its center stood a tall, serpentine alien, its scales gleaming dully in the emergency lighting. "Supreme Commander Karthak," Carl breathed, raising his weapon. The alien's slitted eyes narrowed. "So the mammals send their pet human to do their dirty work." Carl barely had time to dodge as Karthak lunged, razor-sharp claws slashing where his head had been a moment before. They grappled fiercely, crashing into consoles and scattering startled subordinates. A searing pain lanced through Carl's side as Karthak's tail whipped around, its barbed tip finding a gap in his armor. He stumbled, vision blurring. Karthak loomed over him, fangs bared in triumph. "Did you really think you could defeat us, human?" Carl's hand closed around a fallen energy pistol. "I didn't come here to defeat you," he gasped, leveling the weapon. "I came to capture you." The stun blast caught Karthak square in the chest. The alien commander collapsed in a boneless heap as Carl's team swarmed the room, securing the remaining enemy personnel. Carl staggered to his feet, clutching his wounded side. "Status report," he croaked into his comm. "Secondary targets neutralized," came the reply. "Enemy forces are in full retreat." A ragged cheer went up from the assembled strike team. Carl allowed himself a moment of relief before the weight of responsibility settled back onto his shoulders. As they prepared to return to Denobulan space with their high-value prisoner, Carl couldn't shake the feeling that this victory, hard-won as it was, marked only the beginning of a far greater conflict. The journey back to Denobulan space was tense, with Carl's team keeping a wary eye on their high-value prisoner. Supreme Commander Karthak remained silent for most of the trip, his serpentine form coiled in the makeshift brig. It wasn't until they entered the outskirts of Allied territory that the alien spoke, his voice a low hiss. "You think this is victory, human? You've merely opened Pandora's box." Carl ignored the taunt, focusing on piloting the ship towards the sprawling Galactic Council headquarters. As they docked, he caught sight of the celebrations already beginning planetside. Fireworks burst in the atmosphere, and cheering crowds filled the streets. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of debriefings, ceremonies, and strategy sessions. Carl found himself thrust into the spotlight, hailed as a hero by many. But even as he shook hands and accepted accolades, a nagging sense of unease gnawed at him. That feeling proved prescient when an urgent summons arrived, calling for an emergency council session. Carl hurried to the grand chamber, noting the grim faces of those already assembled. Counselor Gruss, a avian being with iridescent plumage, stood at the center of the room. His talons clicked against the floor as he paced. "Esteemed colleagues," Gruss began, his voice tight, "what I'm about to share will shake the very foundations of our alliance." A holographic display flickered to life, filling the air with streams of data and intercepted communications. Carl's eyes widened as he began to comprehend the implications. "Treachery," Gruss continued, "from within our own ranks. We've uncovered evidence of collusion at the highest levels, manipulating both sides of this war for personal gain. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the chamber. Carl watched as several council members shifted uneasily in their seats. "That's preposterous," General Kraylock bellowed, rising to his feet. "Where's your proof?" Gruss tapped a control and new information cascaded across the display. "Here, financial transactions, encrypted messages, supply routes that conveniently avoided attack. The data trail is clear." Chaos erupted as security forces moved to detain implicated council members. Shouts and protests filled the air, punctuated by the whine of energy weapons being primed. In the midst of the commotion, Carl noticed a flicker of movement near King Zarthok's position. A hooded figure slipped from the shadows, a glint of metal visible beneath the cloak. "Assassin!" Carl shouted, already in motion. He tackled the would-be killer just as a muffled shot rang out. The plasma bolt went wide, scorching the wall behind the king's head. Zornak, quick to react, helped Carl subdue the attacker. As they pulled back the hood, Carl's blood ran cold. He recognized the face beneath, one of General Kraylock's personal guards. "Kraylock!" Carl spun, searching for the general. But in the chaos, Kraylock had vanished. Alarms blared throughout the complex as reports flooded in. Kraylock and his co-conspirators had fled, commandeering a battlecruiser and several support ships. In the war room, Carl pored over tactical displays with King Zarthok and the remaining loyal council members. "He's making a run for the Outer Rim strongholds," Carl said, tracing Kraylock's projected course. "If he reaches them, he'll have the resources to mount a full-scale rebellion." King Zarthok nodded gravely. "We cannot allow that to happen. Carl, I'm authorizing you to assemble an elite strike force. Your mission is to hunt down Kraylock and bring him to justice before he can consolidate his power." Carl's mind raced, already formulating a plan. "I'll need my best operatives, including some of our former POWs. Their inside knowledge could be crucial." As he left to gather his team, Carl couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Kartak's cryptic warning echoed in his mind. Whatever conspiracy they had stumbled upon, he sensed it ran deeper than any of them yet realized. Hours later, Carl's strike force departed in a state-of-the-art pursuit vessel. As the stars streaked past, he addressed his diverse crew, a mix of humans, denobulans, and trusted alien defectors. "This won't be an easy mission," Carl said, his voice firm. "We're not just chasing a traitor. We're unraveling a conspiracy that could threaten everything we've fought for." Krazik, the insectoid warrior who had fought beside Carl in the final assault, clicked his mandibles in agreement. "We follow you, Carl Human, to whatever end." With dogged commitment, they set course for the Outer Rim, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead in their pursuit of truth and justice. Carl's pursuit vessel dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of an uncharted nebula, its swirling clouds of gas and dust concealing their ultimate destination. The bridge fell silent as the crew took in the ominous sight. "Sensors are picking up unusual energy readings," reported Krazik, his compound eyes fixed on the readouts. "Unlike anything in our databases." Carl nodded grimly. "That tracks with what we learned from Karthak's interrogation. This is it, the alien overlord's stronghold." As if on cue, proximity alarms blared. A swarm of sleek, predatory ships emerged from the nebula's depths, weapons already charging. "Kraylock's renegades," Carl growled. "Evasive maneuvers!" The pursuit vessel banked hard, narrowly avoiding the first salvo of plasma bolts. Carl's fingers flew across the tactical display, coordinating their ragtag fleet's response. "We can't get bogged down here," he barked. "Zarnak, take your squadron and run interference. We need to punch through to that nebula." The battle that followed was brutal and chaotic. Carl's forces used hit-and-run tactics, striking from multiple vectors to keep Kraylock's ships off balance. But the cost was high. With each engagement, Allied ships winked off the tactical display. As they neared the nebula's outer boundary, a massive energy surge erupted from its heart. Carl watched in horror as an entire wing of their fleet was shredded by crackling tendrils of exotic particles. "By the spirits," breathed Lear Anna, a denobulan science officer. "It's some kind of automated defense system. The whole nebula is one giant death trap." Carl's mind raced. We need those defense codes. Krazik, get our best tech team on it. Everyone else, evasive pattern Delta. What followed was a nerve-wracking gauntlet run. Swarms of killer drones harried them at every turn, while invisible minefields threatened to tear their ships apart. Carl pushed his crew to the limit, relying on split-second decisions and sheer audacity to keep them alive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Krazik's mandibles clicked in triumph. We've done it! Defense grid is powering down! As they emerged into the nebula's core, Carl's breath caught in his throat. Before them loomed a planet-sized structure of impossible geometry, all twisting spires and pulsing energy conduits. That's our target, Carl said, his voice barely above a whisper. The Overlord's stronghold. Prepare for planetfall. The landing was contested every step of the way. Carl led the vanguard himself, fighting through waves of cybernetic monstrosities that seemed more machine than living thing. They clawed their way through twisting corridors that defied Euclidean geometry, each chamber more alien than the last. At last, they breached the central nexus, a vast chamber dominated by a pulsing crystalline structure. As Carl approached, reality itself seemed to warp and twist. Careful, warned Liana, her sensors going haywire. I'm detecting massive energy fluctuations. It's like the laws of physics are breaking down. Before Carl could respond, a booming voice filled their minds, overriding all conscious thought. Insignificant fragments. You dare intrude upon the realm of sovereign Malgarath. Behold your doom and despair. The crystal structure erupted with blinding light. Carl felt his consciousness being torn from his body, hurled into a maelstrom of raw data and impossible geometries. All around him, he sensed the minds of his companions, human, denobulan, and defector alike, struggling against the psychic onslaught. We have to fight this, Carl thought desperately. Whatever this thing is, it's the source of all the corruption. We have to... His thoughts fragmented as Malgorath's presence crashed over him like a tidal wave. Carl found himself adrift in an ocean of alien memories and unknowable knowledge, fighting to maintain his very sense of self. Somewhere in the chaos, he heard Krazik's voice, or was it a data packet, cutting through the noise. Carl Human, the annihilation code, we must... Carl focused on that lifeline, marshaling every ounce of willpower to push back against Malgorath's digital assault. He couldn't give in. Not now. Not when they were so close to ending this nightmare once and for all. Carl clung to that tenuous thread of consciousness, fighting against the overwhelming tide of alien data threatening to submerge his very being. With monumental effort, he reached out to Krazik's presence in the digital maelstrom. The code, Carl projected, his thoughts barely coherent. We have to implement... A searing pain lanced through his mind as he forced himself to focus. Fragments of the annihilation sequence Krazik had uncovered coalesced in Carl's fragmented awareness. With agonizing precision, he began to assemble the code, each line feeling like razors across his synapses. Around him, the essence of Malgorath roiled and thrashed, its incomprehensible form sensing the threat. Carl felt tendrils of alien thought probing his defenses, seeking to crush this last spark of resistance. Now, Carl screamed into the void, unleashing the completed sequence. Reality shuddered. The crystalline nexus pulsed with blinding energy, then began to crack. Carl's consciousness slammed back into his physical form with brutal force. He found himself sprawled on the chamber floor, ears ringing and vision blurred. "Status report," he croaked, struggling to his feet. Liana's voice came through, strained but steady. "Malgorath's primary systems are offline. We've done it, Carl." A ragged cheer went up from the survivors, but Carl's relief was short-lived. As they made their way through the collapsing megastructure, his comm unit crackled with urgent messages from Allied outposts. Under attack, unknown hostiles, systems compromised. Carl's blood ran cold as the implications sank in. They hadn't contained the threat, they'd unleashed it. Days blurred into weeks as Carl and his team fought a desperate rearguard action. They raced from system to system, battling nightmarish fusions of flesh and machine that defied conventional tactics. Each victory felt hollow as more colonies fell silent. In a war room hastily assembled on a frontier world, Carl stood before a holographic display of the known galaxy. Vast swaths pulsed an angry red, indicating compromised sectors. King Zarthok's hologram flickered to life, his expression grim. "We're out of options, Carl. We must initiate the Omega Protocol." Carl's shoulders sagged. He knew what that meant, a complete purge of all advanced AI and neural networks across inhabited space. It would set civilization back centuries, but the alternative was extinction. "Do it," Carl said, his voice barely above a whisper. As the galactic reset began, Carl led the exodus. Ragtag fleets of survivors limped towards the outer rim, seeking sanctuary on worlds untouched by the technoplague. They touched down on a verdant planet orbiting twin suns, the binary light casting long shadows as they disembarked. Months passed in a haze of backbreaking labor. Carl worked alongside humans and aliens alike, tilling soil, constructing rudimentary shelters, and relearning skills long forgotten in the age of automation. The work was grueling, but there was a simple satisfaction in it, a connection to something primal and enduring. One evening, as Carl sat by a crackling fire, a young denobulan approached him tentatively. "Elder," she said, her voice tinged with awe, "will you tell us a story of the old days?" Carl smiled, gesturing for the girl to sit. As more gathered around, he began to speak, his voice carrying into the star-filled night. "Long ago on a world called Earth."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.